Prince and Michael Jackson. They were both black men from the Midwest. They both had abusive fathers. They were both precocious musical standouts from a young age. They both became stars and eventually superstars during the exact same period. They were both the first African American sex symbols in pop music, or perhaps in any area, whose appeal transcended ethnic boundaries. Their songs have been, and continue to be, celebrated by multiple generations of music fans. More importantly, their music influenced, and continues to influence, multiple generations of musical artists to this day. We've done 4 installments so far in our series examining the fascinatingly parallel careers of the twin towers of R&B and pop in the 1980s. On this episode, Chris and I will give you the final installment of Prince and Michael's careers, focusing on the sad twilights of their lives and careers in the 21st century, leading up to their tragic deaths. Welcome to Prince versus Michael Jackson, the final chapter.
Welcome, everyone, to the 26th edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Christopher O'Connor coming to you from suburban Houston, and with me, as always, is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea.
Good.
Yes, and we host the podcast made just for you. We don't do hot takes on this thing, we do honest takes. So then this podcast belongs to you. Now, who are you? You are the rock geek iconoclastic outsider looking for safe haven in a world where rock no longer predominates. Well, it sure as heck does here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report. And we live rock and roll in its full majesty and in its full color and at full force. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff that you never knew before. And now you can join us on our new invite-only Facebook group, which we call the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly Community. Join us there and share thoughts, musings, and random excitement with fellow travelers along the curmudgeonly path to rock and roll goodness. Arturo, Happy New Year, brother.
Happy New Year. This is the first podcast, our first episode of the new calendar year. And, you know, it's fitting that we're doing Prince versus Michael Jackson, our final chapter. It's been, 6 years now since Prince died and 13 years since Michael Jackson died.
Yep.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if there's any numerical, interesting stuff going on there, but
no, hey, it is what it is. And hey, why not begin a glorious new year by talking about death?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, not just death. I mean, I guess that's the spoiler. This is the last chapter. We will talk about the 2000s portion for Michael and Prince, where I guess you can say had tragic endings, but weren't completely terrible. I mean,
especially in Prince's end, it's not completely terrible at all.
No, not at all. I think, but we'll certainly get into that. But we have a portal to the other end of the dimension to get to first.
Yes,
do we not?
Absolutely.
The music is coming. The spaceships are landing. The Martians are in control. Yes, folks, we are in the parallel universe where there's a rip in the space-time continuum, which sounds like one of my farts. And it reveals that there is a world where rock and roll is still taken seriously, and there is such a thing as a rock star that deserves to be a rock star that plays those arenas and stadiums, although not right now because of Omicron. Fish and My Morning Jacket and a few others had to cancel. Boo-hoo. Although String Cheese Incident did not. Fuck them. But here we are again, the Parallel Universe segment where we both take a turn in introducing you to a new album that we are vibing on and recommending to you strongly. Arturo, you are up first. What's in your queue here in the Parallel Universe?
Yes. Okay. Now, I'm talking about the British band Idols, and their latest album came out in October, Crawler. Now, Idols are one of the biggest and most critically acclaimed rock groups in the UK right now. In a parallel universe, they would be much bigger in the US. So, hey, there's our angle. Um,
Yep.
their loud, brash brand of highly politicized punk rock has kind of placed them alongside Slayford Mods in the vanguard of a quote unquote important contemporary British bands. Now, I have to admit something here. I previously never liked this band except for a couple of songs. I thought their first two albums, 2017's Brutalism and 2018's Joy as an Act of Resistance, were just the same monotonous punk rock noise over and over again. Once you've heard one Idol song, you've heard them all, you know? However, they started to make a little change. Their COVID lockdown album of 2020, Ultramono, was mostly more of the same, except with a couple of tracks that harken back to the industrial metal sound of Godflesh for all like one or two people out there who still remember Godflesh. This intriguingly hinted at a band that was possibly ready to break out of the musically conservative shackles, if you will, of traditional punk rock. But oh my God, did this in no way prepare the listener for the quantum leap this band has just made on Crawler. This just came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, we get distinctive songs with interesting, memorable riffs. Melodies and honest to God hooks seep into the mix.
Wow. Imagine that.
I know, right? Unconventional rhythms galore. You can't really call them a punk rock band anymore. They're now more of a post-punk band edging into alternative, really. They've always been political, hardcore leftist, like a lot of the great British punk bands. But their best songs are now all about the personal or the realm of the personal. Most of the album deals with frontman Joe Talbot's alcoholism and mental health issues. Standout tracks for those who are interested and don't want to listen to the album, you care about individual songs. You have the intense churning The Wheel, where Talbot does a mock gospel chant of "Can I get a hallelujah" as the chorus hook. Yes, it's ironic. The song is about dealing with depression and frustration. There's New Sensation, which lashes out at media-obsessed pop stars and grooves like the Canadian band Mets trying to be funky. You have When the Lights Come On, which does Joy Division better than any band has since Joy Division, and inverts the classic Pete Townsend lyric by claiming the kids are not all right.
There you go.
Welcome to relevance, Idols, at least to these curmudgeonly ears. You've made the densest, most dynamic rock album of 2021, and in my opinion, the only genuine 5-star album of the year to boot. Great album. Check it out.
Like you said, it's not punk. It's way more artsy and way more thought out than that. And like you said, one of the themes is that sort of the bleakness of addiction. It makes me wonder if like alcoholism was like, okay, I'm really fucked up now, and so I don't need punk, and I'm just going to do what I'm capable of. So who knows? Yeah. Maybe illness makes for a better record.
Yeah, well, I mean, Talbot himself in an interview said that the last album, Ultramono, was like the most Idols album we could have made. Basically said, So like after this, like we just can't do that shit anymore. So like they for this fourth album, they totally just like basically went back to the drawing board and just reinvented themselves from scratch. And I think they're all the better for it. This is not only their best album, it's by far and away their best album.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because, here we are like, the first week of January of a new year. And, we're all in that introspection mode. And one of the things that's tough, and I think a lot of us go through this, at least at some point. I just went through this like 6 months ago where you're like, the only thing worse than phoning it in is knowing that you're phoning it in.
Yeah.
And catching yourself phoning it in.
Yeah.
And so, well, thank goodness. Because like you said, if we sound like ourselves, oh shit, that's not a good thing. So here you go. And lo and behold, I know it's your number one. It's not necessarily my number one, but It's a good record. It's a very good record, and it makes me not want to listen to their previous stuff from the way that you describe it.
Yeah,
I don't want it to spoil me.
you might as well start with this. If you're an American fan, start with this album.
Right. I know we have friends and associates that probably disagree with us, and I'm sure that several of you who are just as digging in the crates rock geek as us probably do. If you do, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Speaking of which, going further into the parallel universe, there's probably a few of you that might fuss with my choice this week as well. I'm making a superlative argument as well, and this is not post-punk, this is hip-hop. And I will be focusing on an album by British Nigerian female rapper named Little Simz. And this is her album, Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. And let me describe this. It's been getting a lot of praise, and it actually deserves it. How about that? So our longtime listeners might remember that in 2021, I covered albums in this Parallel Universe segment by a couple of black rappers from the UK. Both first-generation children of immigrants with lots to say about the ebb and flow and the slings and arrows of being black, middle class, and different in modern-day Britain. Now, as the end of this last year, 2021, approached, I considered Get's Conflict of Interest, that's one, and Dave's We're All Alone in This Together, that's the other, among the best records I had heard, probably both on my top 25. But then I had realized I missed a spot when I was reading all the coverage of the year's best records into the top 10s, and noticed that I missed a spot from that exact same scene, which I'll call sort of the Afro-British first-generation scene. And there was this album, Sometimes I Might Be Introvert by Lil Simz. And now I realize that those guys are actually mediocre in comparison with her. So now let us bow at the feet of, and I hope I get this right, Simbi Abasola Abiola Ajikawa. She is 27 years old, and she is of Nigerian Yoruba descent. Now, this album, I really believe it's the best hip-hop album I've heard in a while, probably the best one I heard in 2021. It exudes a cool confidence, and for this era, it's unusually varied musically. You get Afrobeat, you get 70s R&B, some free jazz, some disco. A few spots remind me of Tricky era British EDM, some trap house for all you Chief Keef fans out there, all four of you, and some over-the-top cinematic score style classical stuff. Do some of her producers bite Kanye West's classic work here at times? What with the
yes,
yes, with the sped up and altered vocal samples from the old soul canon? Yeah, sure. But they also know that Lil Simz is a star who can turn their reverence into original bursts of edgy feminism and old school braggadocio. Now, if Simz can star over the beats that you have heard before, like those, then just imagine how great she is when she sounds over stuff that maybe you have not heard so much in hip-hop, or if ever. So let's run through a few highlights. Now, let's take the song Speed. This is a minimalist track driven by an Afro-inspired drum beat and this weird-ass little keyboard loop. And she rides that beat like it's a 1977 Stingray. Then there's the song Rolling Stone. Not exactly the most inspired name, but this song is even weirder and even cooler. Song starts as an homage to the kind of stuff that Timbaland and Ludacris were doing together 20 years ago, where it's all itchy and twitchy and featuring the kind of clever in-character disses that Luda was a master at back then. But then the song segues into this really kind of weird super spare and cheap-sounding drum clap that has a spooky trap house bass line over it. And now all of a sudden this sort of dripping charisma and play toughness sort of turns into icicles in vocal form. Gets darker and really personal. My favorite line in there is, "You can't diss me 3 times, pull up behind. You'll never see I'm probably the reason why your bosses had to resign." kind of fun. And then you get the truly magnificent 1-2 punch towards the back end of the album of Point and Kill and Fear No Man. These are explicitly steeped in Nigerian funk. The polyrhythms, the chants, the horn breaks, and then that distinctive groove that was made world famous by Fela Kuti and his peers there. And Lil Simz pulls a really neat trick, because it doesn't seem to me that would be the easiest thing to have a smooth flow over, but she does it masterfully. So it's eccentric, but she handles it and tackles it like a master. So now, can't say this album's perfect, and it's definitely not 5 stars, because just like every other hip hop album these days are released over the last 15 years. Sometimes I might be extrovert. It falls a few times into those hokily introspective monologia and those sort of abstract bullshit tracks that we've complained about on this podcast before.
Yep.
I mean, I guess it's hard to be Simz's age and to not be influenced by Drake and Nicki Minaj and the other big names in the mainstream. But hey, you get rid of these several what she calls interludes, and the album pretty much approaches greatness. But damn it, she can't help herself, and there goes that. Even so, Little Simz's Sometimes I Might Be Introvert is definitely, in my opinion, a must-hear. It is the rare hip-hop release these days that actually advances the idiom, and for that, she deserves an applause.
Yeah, I'll keep my my review really short. I don't think this album is very good. 2 reasons. Number one, Inflow, the mastermind behind Salt, the group Salt, he produced this record, and I don't like the job he did on this record for the most part. I'm not a fan of the symphonic production. For me, like, strings and hip hop don't really go well together unless like you're doing some really weird, dirty shit like RZA does at his best.
Yeah, the back in the day, they called those drama beats, and there were very few people that could do them well. Like Noriega could do a drama beat really well, but very few and far between that could do it.
Yeah, well, this album is it's like 70 to 80% one gigantic drama beat, and I'm not a fan of it. I think it's a bit bloated. I think it's a bit indulgent. Yeah, I get the eclecticism that she's going for, but and this dovetails into my critique number 2. I think the production takes away from the songs, and the songs, in my opinion, don't have much to offer, because I don't think Little Simz is a very good rapper. She has the same flow in every single song.
I disagree, actually.
She kind of, almost every single song, she raps the same way. It's the same flow over and over again. It's to the point where she's not even rapping. She's just speaking fast.
Yeah, but don't confuse flow with voice inflection. I think that her flow, she mixes it up. I mean, like I said, a couple of those songs.
I don't think so.
I mean, she's able to do like Rolling Stone. She does this sort of classic, like those kind of slinky flows that Timbaland, you almost had to do those kind of flows back then. She kind of does that. She has some more sort of psychotic trap house flows, and there's that. The one thing I will say, yeah, her voice is kind of flat and maybe purposefully sociopathic. That, I guess, would be one complaint. And I understand where you're saying. I think that it's easy to get caught up in those interludes, which, like I said, they're basically they're these 5-minute stream of consciousness, maybe stoned off her ass monologues. With some of those string beats, you cut back on those, you're talking about one of the best hip hop records of the last 10 years. But for where we are in 2021, this was the best of these hip hop records I heard last year.
I think she needs to work on her rapping skills. I think she needs to stop listening to mainstream American hip hop artists and get a little more down with the underground. To her credit, she said that toward the end of the year, she gave an interview. She said that she was really inspired by Idol's recent album, and that it may be an influence on her next record. Well, it can only improve her music. I'll say that.
Yeah,
much.
I was going to say, take this sort of, like you said, emo Afrobeat thing, and now put it through that same Joy Division buzzer, and that would be some interesting shit.
And maybe get idols in the studio with her too to help her out, because I think she needs the help.
Oh, geez. Yeah, there's an interesting mix, So on that note, there are our parallel universe choices for the week, Idols and Little Simz. Definitely go check them out wherever you get your music, whether you go streaming or you go torrents, doesn't matter. We want you listening to the new shit, and we want you listening to it intently. Now, we have Prince and Michael Jackson to talk about. Arturo, launch us into the main meat here of the episode.
Yes, I will welcome everyone listening to the final installment, all of you out there listening, the millions and millions of Curmudgeonly fans.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the final installment of our epic, critically acclaimed, award-winning series chronicling the parallel careers of the two male titans of 1980s pop. In the previous installment, 4 episodes ago, we delved into the 1990s, where Michael Jackson's commercial and artistic fortunes started to drop. His disturbing obsession with plastic surgery started to put off the public, and his even more disturbing pedophilia became common knowledge and tabloid news fodder, and his addiction to pain-killing drugs deepened. Prince, on the other hand, started the decade wonderfully with the near masterpiece Love Symbol, then embarked on a much publicized battle with his label Warner Brothers over artistic freedom and the control of his master tapes. The result wasn't just the change of his name into a symbol to prevent Warner Brothers and his publishing company with Warner Brothers from making money from his name. The standoff also resulted in a staggering plethora of album releases that released him from contractual duties to Warner Brothers and reinforced his belief in an artist's right to release as much music as they want. Now, the utter and defiant lack of quality control leads to an extremely inconsistent output that produced some gems if one is so inclined to dive deep into that discography. Now, in this final and quite frankly sad chapter in the series, we dive into what for Michael is his final decade until his death in 2009, and what for Prince is his final decade and a half until his death in 2016. Michael only releases one album during this time, and he makes more news for his legal wranglings with his record label, and surprise, surprise, more people accusing him of sexually abusing children. He never finishes the album that was supposed to be the follow-up to 2001's Invincible, and his drug abuse catches up to him as he dies in 2009 of a heart attack just before he was to embark on a half-year residency of concerts at London's O2 Arena. The new decade and century sees Prince ditching the symbol and going back to recording and performing under his name. He puts out a steady slew of studio albums from 2001 onward with wildly varying results. A super fast sprint review of all his 21st century albums will culminate the Prince section of this episode. However, it's as a touring artist that Prince really shines during this time, raking in millions of dollars as a legacy artist, selling out arenas throughout the world and turning on younger generations of music fans to his brilliance. More importantly, it's during this time that Prince seemingly started to feel at ease with his status as an elder statesman and pop music icon. Alas, like Michael Jackson, Prince also succumbed to years of abusing painkiller drugs and died of an overdose in 2016. So as sad as their stories ended, this is really a celebration of two artists who defined their era, transformed R&B and pop music in the process, and will forever endure as undying influences for future generations of music fans.
There's always a good time to be found within the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly community. That is our invite-only private Facebook group that Arturo and I launched in December. So far, it's been a spirited romp through this podcast's decidedly bent worldview, and as it turns out, through those of our members as well. Now, is Iron Maiden a good example of a band that blended muso mastery and pop accessibility to an acceptable degree? Well, one of our members sure thinks so, and we gave him the safe space to do it, damn it. If bold opinions and thoughts and passionate defenses of rock and roll are your jam, then the Curmudgeon Rock Report's curmudgeonly community is for you. Come find us, and we will probably let you in.
Okay, so Prince versus Michael Jackson, the final chapter. Now we will delve into the final decade of Michael Jackson's life, the final sad decade of Michael Jackson's life. Chris, let's get started.
Yeah, so when we talk about Michael, I know at the top of the show that you mentioned all of those wonderful things that were going on, at least with the 90s. When we talked about this in chapter 4, at that point, we had seen the morphing of Michael from handsome black man into creepy looking white woman. And you had the stories of the drug abuse, obviously the disturbing lawsuit and settlement that he got hit with in 93. Want to make it clear, by the way, Michael was never convicted of any of this stuff.
That is true. That is true.
Involving his these accusations that he molested children. But that first comes up in the 90s. His music output is solid, but all of the other bullshit was overshadowing it. And then a strange thing happens. 2000, 2001, you start to get this divide where the new generation of black R&B and hip hop artists want to celebrate the accomplishments and the legacy of Michael Jackson, and music fans out there are realizing that Michael is a legend, still enjoying the songs. Thriller is still selling like crazy, Bad is still selling like crazy, Off the Wall is starting to become a canonical classic and on everybody's top 100. It's in my personal top 10. At the same time, though, we all just wanted the current version of Michael Jackson to go away and to not have anything to do with us ever. So there's this real dichotomy of knowing that we have a genius worth celebrating who creeps us the fuck out otherwise. And I think that this really manifests itself in Michael's only album of the 2000s. Remember, he only made it to 2009, so we're only talking about a 9-year streak here. He releases the album Invincible on October 30th, 2001. As it proves out, Invincible was anything but. This album took 4 years and $30 million to produce, which might as well make it the Ishtar of all albums.
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. And man, that's cold. So let's talk a little bit about this piece of shit. Or this record. Now, I'll give it this.
Only a little bit, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to go into like an hour-long diatribe or a treatise. So, Invincible comes out in 2001, month after September 11th. That's a bad omen right there. Who the hell wants phony Michael Jackson right after, the world has ended? I'll say this about the record. The production is so clean, you could eat broccoli off it. But by this point, Michael seems like he was so desperate for a hit, or at least continued relevance, that he tried for his own Asia phase, which, like I said before, it took about 4 years and $30 million to create. And when he released it, he had 16 songs, and it was worth 76 minutes. Again,
may I interrupt, Chris? For those of you out there who don't know Asia is the classic album by Steely Dan from 1977 that took I don't know how much, millions of dollars to make, and an army of 500 session musicians. Yeah,
well, I was getting to that, but Steely Dan, he was not. And again, so there's the 16 songs, the 76 minutes. Like you alluded to, it seemed like if you look at the credits, they're like a mile long, and there's maybe at least 100 people that were involved in this thing. But they tried to do he maybe thought he was doing the Steely Dan thing and getting desperate, but Steely Dan made a classic. Michael, no, he no longer had the songs or the edge or anything interesting to say. And the only things he had to say are all the stuff that he had to say before, the kind of the sexual obsessions, the paranoia, the media stuff, all that. And he was retreading it, and he had said it much, much, much better 15 to 20 years earlier, which obviously put him in a position to put out this piece of crap, but he was not going to recreate any magic. Best thing I can say about the record is that there's some really nice drum machine programming and vocal overdubbing, and it was a showcase for a young producer at the time named Rodney Jerkins, who was pumping out hits for lots of R&B folks, and he was a hot name. Jerkins comes in and co-writes and produces 6 songs on the record. A few really interesting experiments that, if it hadn't been for Michael Jackson, might have actually been pretty good. One called Heartbreaker, which is very much a reggae-inspired, jittery, up-tempo thing, really more sort of dubstep. And again, if you take Michael and his blithering, sort of self-importance out of it, not bad. But then you get to the album's first single, which is called You Rock My World, which is reminiscent of the lesser songs on Bad, and also sounded strangely like almost everything else coming out in 2001. It wouldn't be a stretch for Beyonce to sing over this thing, or for Jay-Z to rap over it. I mean, literally, it sounds like everything else. Talk about drama beats. This is like Michael, putting out an R&B song over a drama bit. Or a drama beat. The best thing about it is the Chris Tucker shtick at the beginning of it. So let's just put it this way. The song is so competently Michael is that it's boring as hell. It's just Michael doing his thing, but with like no juice behind it, and it's just a snoozer. But boring is at least forgivable. Ripping yourself off isn't. And actually, with the song Butterflies, Michael isn't even really ripping himself off. I do not think it is a coincidence that Butterflies sounds a whole lot like I Can't Help It from Off the Wall.
Yeah.
Similar instrumentation, similar verse-chorus structure, similar sexual longing theme. Okay, fine. But Stevie Wonder wrote I Can't Help It, not Michael. Now, this is how far gone Michael was at this point in terms of inspiration. And then there's the song The Lost Children. I encourage it. Yes. Okay.
Where were they found?
Yeah, I was going to say this is a better chapter than the found children. I don't want to hear about the found children, but yes, I know. I encourage everyone to listen to this song because it makes "Heal the World" sounds like it really does. It makes it sound like "Hey Jude." Let me repeat that. This song, "The Lost Children," makes "Heal the World" sound like "Hey Jude." This may actually be Michael's worst song, which, given the deterioration of his music over the preceding decade, is really saying something. Nope, this is desperation, not inspiration. And it was clear that with Invincible, Michael was either approaching or had reached artistic bankruptcy, which is a perfect way to segue into our next discussion. Correct, Arturo?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, my favorite aspect of Invincible is the feud with his record label that it started.
Yes. Yeah, and that's where we're going. So we talk about artistic bankruptcy, which is better than almost risking real bankruptcy. So now Michael had been part of Epic / Columbia / Sony for a long time, since actually goes back to the Jacksons. And then he releases his first album on Epic. So long-standing relationship. Chairman at the time, at this point, was Tommy Mottola, otherwise known as Mariah Carey's ex-husband. So Invincible is very poorly received, or at least as poorly received as a 2-time platinum record can be. This album still sold 2 million, or shipped 2 million copies in the States, even though, people didn't care about it at all after September 11th. So it's so badly received that Michael's label literally stopped promoting it. Literally, as in just dropped it in 2002. And so Michael throws a fit and goes out there and is calling Mr. Mottola a racist devil all over the place, saying that it's a conspiracy against me as a black man, to make me look bad. Michael is so out of line, even Al Sharpton wanted nothing to do with this. True story. Go look it up. The New York Post reported on this. Yeah. Al Sharpton wanted nothing to do with Michael Jackson attacking Tommy Mottola. And so you do that, and you refuse to tour to get back at Tommy Mottola. Well, Tommy Mottola is signing the checks, and so that is a good way to lose your record label deal.
Yeah.
Which Michael did. And so now he's in 2002. His album has bombed. Obviously, it was a money loser. It wasn't well received. You Rock My World was only a minor hit, a modest hit. And so he's kind of like, okay, I'm stuck in a vortex here. So how can I rehab my image?
My favorite part of this story coming up.
Yes. And so somebody thought in Michael's camp that it was a good idea to get in touch with Martin Bashir, who at that point was most famous for reportage on Princess Diana in Britain with the BBC. And of course, as it comes out, he did a whole lot of lying. He lied to Diana to coerce her to actually do the special. And that's where Bashir became famous. He did an interview with Diana, but coerced her and lied to her about the background to get her on camera. And so he turns out to be a disgraced scumbag. But anyway, but at the time, he was one of the more respected journalists in Britain. Michael agrees to do this special called, I believe, Living with Michael Jackson. And this comes out in early 2003. And it is a complete, utter, unbelievable disaster for Michael for several reasons. Let me just, there's a wonderful, I guess you could call it an obituary that an old friend of mine, Brian Hyatt, who writes for Rolling Stone, wrote in 2009. Basically, a what went wrong obituary. This is how it begins. And I'll just read this from Brian's story. As Michael Jackson hits his mid-40s, he was addicted to prescription painkillers, running out of cash, facing fading career prospects, and a television special was about to ruin what was left of his life. Jackson had agreed to cooperate on an all-access documentary with British journalist Martin Bashir, believing that a candid look at his life, complete with quotes such as, "If there were no children on this earth, I would jump off the balcony immediately," would make the world finally understand him and help him launch a thriller-level comeback. Just before the documentary's 2003 airing, one of Jackson's then associates got word of its contents and had the unpleasant job of telling Jackson that Bashir's film was a complete disaster. See, it was such a disaster that I accidentally quoted this article before I read it. This was the worst thing to happen since Jackson settled child molestation charges a decade earlier. Jackson, who was during this time taking a mix of OxyContin, Demerol, and Xanax, or whatever he could get his hands on, was shattered. He went nuts, says this associate. It was the first in a series of tantrums that would culminate in him tearing apart a hotel room in Las Vegas. Around this time, Jackson went into hiding. Fellow child star Donny Osmond, an old friend, remembers getting a call from Jackson. "I said to him, 'Mike, where are you?' Osmond recalls. And Michael said, 'Please don't tell anybody. I rented a touring bus and I took my kids and we're somewhere in Arizona.' I said, what are you doing?" He said, "I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want anybody to know where I'm at." But he couldn't hide forever. If you watch this thing, it's pretty incredible. One, it's pretty clear that Michael is higher than a friggin' kite through the whole thing and is just wasted at this point. He's parading his kids around in masks so that nobody can really see their faces. At one point, he's saying hi to his fans, and in doing so, he hangs his youngest son, who at the time was baby, blanket over the balcony. Oh, but he loves the children. I
remember that. Yeah.
And so remember, that was the first thing that he got shit for. The other one was, and this is extraordinary given what happened. There's a section of this thing where Martin Bashir confronts him saying, "This is really uncomfortable. I noticed that you were hanging out with this kid named Gavin, who was a young boy. And was he, like 12 years old, 13 years old at the time?" And just asked him straight out, are you sharing a bed with children? And talks about his relationship with kids and the closeness. And Michael actually says it's a beautiful thing. Now, he claims that in Gavin's case, he's on the floor in a sleeping bag and Gavin and his brother are taking the bed. But he does cop to sleeping with kids in his bed before this. He talks about his relationship with Macaulay Culkin and Macaulay Culkin's brothers and sharing the bed with them at one point. And at one point, quoting, it's very right. It's very loving. And then a few seconds later, it's what the world needs now. What's wrong with sharing? Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with sharing love? I mean, this in retrospect, this sounds like an advertisement for NAMBLA.
Yeah.
And it goes on.
Is this on YouTube?
It is on YouTube. There are, if you do a YouTube search for Martin Bashir, Michael Jackson, somebody has it uploaded in 10 parts. Part 9 is where it gets really, really dark, and this is where a lot of this is coming from. So yeah, definitely go check this out. But he goes into this whole thing about how kids have it so rough, and it's a horrible world. And don't we just want to hug all the kids, and we just got to keep them safe? And like I said, Michael really had this idea that he was a living kid, that he was supposed to be the protector of all the children. As it turns out, remember, this is all allegations. As it turns out, this is like the pedophiles. It's everybody else's fault but mine. Excuse.
Yeah.
And the kid in this thing, Gavin Arvizo is his name. A couple months later, because Bashir was so alarming, the Santa Barbara County police start investigating this, and they start talking to the kid, and probing. And it comes out a few months later, Gavin's like, yeah, he's been getting me drunk and masturbating me or whatever for a while. And they keep investigating. They did a search warrant on Neverland Ranch. And in mid-November of 2003, Michael is arrested on molestation charges. And so he's finally actually facing criminal charges for a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And so again, this documentary, which again is just fascinatingly creepy, Michael, no self-awareness whatsoever, and again, higher than a kite, basically admits that he might as well be a child molester without saying it. And then a couple of years later, we get into the next chapter, which is the trial. We talked a little bit about this in chapter 4. This happens in 2005. Really disgusting spectacle in the sense of it's a sensationalized trial in the vein of like a OJ. They did not let the cameras in the courtroom. That's the only difference. But it was one witness after another that had no credibility. Why? Because everybody made money off this thing.
Yep.
Talk to the maid. Well, the maid had, or the butler or somebody had. The limo driver, one of those folks, had been paid like $50,000 by the National Enquirer to be an anonymous source at one point, and just there was stuff like that. There were, folks that were signing non-disclosure agreements or whatever, I'll give you $200,000 to go away, or parents, this is the worst part is, the sort of the business associates with kids and all that. And so everybody was making money from somewhere. And so nobody had any credibility. And the jury had no choice but to acquit Michael. And, another point, like we said, if you are in the right industry with the right backing and you got a lot of money, you can get away with a lot of this shit. See Harvey Weinstein. I
know. I hear what you're saying. What shocks me is that after this, you still had these blind or willfully blind Michael Jackson fans saying, no, he's not a pedophile. He really is a Peter Pan figure. He really is an overgrown little kid. And there are people out there who fucking believe this shit. They believed it.
I know. And look, and I'm glad you brought that up because for me, look, I have been the Michaelologist in this series of episodes. And it's hard for me. I mean, I've talked about this. He was my musical hero growing up. I mean, I had Thriller on vinyl, and my father was a huge Thriller fan. We played that vinyl so much, we practically just tore the needle through it. And so being an admirer of Michael, growing up on that music, growing up on those videos, the guy was a performance hero. He literally was a hero to a lot of people. Yeah. And, to repeat something I've said in a couple episodes, what would happen if you actually got to meet your heroes? Would they still beat your heroes? Maybe not. And so I never wanted to believe it. I mean, it's still shocking. I still don't like thinking about it. And I'll make maybe it's a little bit of a leap, but it comes from the same place. Like Woody Allen, this idea of how do we separate the art from the artist? Can we do it? And I think we all want to to the point where, to your point, Arturo, that a lot of people were still, like, remember, he never dropped off in Europe. He never dropped off in Asia. And, he was getting like a shitload of money from like sheiks in Bahrain and Dubai, to go do private shows, And so there were these people that believed in Michael because he was a special artist, a special musician, a special public figure. And like I said, Woody, it took him 3 years before Me Too got him.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. It's we want to believe in the art, not the artist. I mean, and this is nothing new. Roman Polanski, can't come back in the U.S. because he drugged and raped a 13-year-old apparently. Or Bill Cosby. It's the same thing. Yeah. I don't want to believe anything about Bill Cosby. So there is that hero worship, but I mean, and to this day, it still maintains Michael. I mean, the Eagles album is ahead of him now as far as the greatest selling album of all time, but Thriller, he still gets millions of downloads. Sure. His estate still makes profit every year, not just from the Beatles catalog. Best thing he ever did financially, by the way, was die. So because he stopped spending all his money. Yeah. So I don't know. Again, so art versus artist, and that's where it gets complicated, but that's really the story of Michael. So
now, Michael, financial problems. Speaking of financial problems,
yeah, well, that's what happens here is that he's been living on the edge. He was a spendthrift, like a spendthrift, like buying ridiculous shit. Like Neverland. Buying Neverland in the first place was crazy, but then putting the zoo and the roller coaster and all that, and he's an exorbitant spender, and he's like 9 figures in debt. Like, yeah, he's as bad as Donald Trump, almost, not quite, but he's in that boat. If it wasn't for owning the Beatles publishing rights, he probably would have had to declare bankruptcy, or people would have stopped funding him. But he's going broker and broker, and he's having to do these things like play for sheiks over in the Middle East. And I guess apparently he was so disgusted over the coverage of this molestation trial that he had to abandon Neverland and go back there because it was toxic. Real reason is I think the real reason is he probably thought he was going to get foreclosed on and didn't want the embarrassment of having the camera show up while he's getting evicted. So yeah, he's broke, and he, like you said, he had to basically. Is this true? I think this, and I think I saw this where he basically had to second mortgage Neverland to keep himself out of trouble with one of the banks. Yep. And he, so the idea, and he had to borrow like $300 million to keep going. And so
he actually lived in Bahrain for a little while in the house of the son of Sheikh Abdullah.
Yep. Well, that was a thing. He essentially, last few years of his life, he lived most of the time internationally. Anybody who would take him in, because he wanted to stay the hell out of LA, and he would come back once in a while. Now, main reason he came back at the end of his life is because he. This is when he's broke, as has been covered. Yeah. He agrees to do this residency at the O2 in London. It was originally going to be, I believe, 5 shows. It was going to be like 5 or 10 shows. Right. And he was going to do these like big, elaborate, Michael Jackson type shows with like, 1,000 dancers and fireworks and, big ass TV screens and all that kind of crazy shit. But it sold so well that it turned out it was going to be a 50 show residency.
Lots of money. Yeah. A whopping, I think I read here, it's between $200 and $300 million.
Yes, which, to put this in context, at this point, I think the most he had made off a tour was Dangerous, which was $150 million. And that is at a point where he was actually still had hits, where he wasn't. He was a kind of an oddity, and he was being ostracized, but he was not a pariah at that point. And he was making $150 million. Now he is a pariah and stands to make $300 million, to make twice as much.
Well, it also helps that it's not a touring show. It's
No.
one venue all the way
Yeah.
through. So you're
Right.
saving money, you know.
Yeah. You're doing that, so it's profitable as hell. I mean, essentially, it's the equivalent of like if he played Vegas. The difference being is
Right.
O2 is a huge arena as opposed to like fucking Caesar's Palace.
Right.
But so 50 show residency. Keep in mind, now this is a guy who's horribly whacked out on drugs, and even if he wasn't, because of all the dancing, he's destroyed his back. Like his back was like literally like destroyed. Bad knees, all that kind of stuff, arthritis, and everything like that. And so, given the physical demands of it, was that guy really going? Or tell me, do you really think he would have gotten through 50 shows?
No, I don't think he would have gotten through like 10. I mean, think about it. Like he started his painkiller addiction with morphine, and after he had his scalp was singed,
Yeah,
and then that made him an addict. And now, like you said, arthritis, back pain, knee problems, more pills.
yeah, no, yeah. Well, it's not even pills at this point, which we'll get into in a bit. He's just whacked out at this point. But, and if you go back in the early part of the Curmudgeon Rock Report's wonderful catalog of episodes, we did an episode on our favorite, or what we think are the best rock and roll movies. And I covered the Michael documentary, This Is It.
Right.
Which it's footage taken of the rehearsal that he did for these O2 shows the day before he died. And it is astonishing. Say what you want. Would he have gotten through the 50 shows? Maybe, maybe not. But that guy was still working his ass off and was still superhuman. Again, you're talking about a frail, drug-addicted 50-year-old guy. He was 2 months from turning 51. And you see him in this footage, and he's doing a dance routine to "Wanna Be Starting Something," but the "Wanna Be Starting Something" is played even faster than it is on the record. Like it's a super fast version of "Wanna Be Starting Something," and he's dancing along, doing the crazy steps and all of that, and then he stops and says, "No, I'm not really feeling that. It's got to be funkier." So he still has the work ethic. He's still pushing himself. He's still doing things that other people can't do. Just as I don't want to go through the whole thing because I did it in that episode, but the one line that stays with me is Michael's own music director saying, "Dude, nobody hears what you hear, so you tell me what you want and I'll do it. I'm not going to direct you. You direct me."
Right.
And so he's still at the top of his form. Like I said, the guy he's working his ass off. He's showing his brilliance, all of that. But yeah, I mean, just health wise and where he is, it's kind of like, how the hell is he doing this? Because it's the next day that is the tragedy, which we'll get into now. That was Michael died at 50 years old in Southern California, the Los Angeles area, on June 25th, 2009. To the world's shock and amazement, the thing that killed him was that he had a licensed doctor, a guy named Conrad Murray, who was administering a drug known as propofol to Michael through shots or intravenously, one of the two. Or, basically Michael's laying there and the propofol is being administered. Propofol is an anesthesia, a very powerful anesthesia. So not only is Michael he's not only taking drugs for pain, turns out he can't sleep either.
Jeez.
And is resorting to anesthesia to do this.
God.
And so what happens is Murray, through whatever negligence or whatever is going on, overdoses Michael. And it's one of these things where instead of like calling 911 or calling for other help, he's like, talking to the maid. He's calling the lawyers. He being Murray, he's calling everybody except the people he's supposed to be calling. And there you go. Michael has died of an anesthesia overdose.
Jeez.
He also had a couple of anxiety meds in his system. Ativan was one of them. Midazolam, I believe, was another one as well. So, he's got a nice cocktail in there, but it's the propofol. So he's that far gone. Obviously, this became a huge scandal. Murray was brought up on negligent homicide charges, manslaughter charges, and I believe was convicted. But it also starts off this kerfuffle for Michael's money with his family. I mean, there's Vanity Fair article that I read on another one of these episodes where LaToya and Janet and his mom are going in to secure the bag of cash that he kept under his bed to make sure that the brothers didn't steal it. That's how bad this was. And also in the same Vanity Fair article, I mean, poor Janet. Janet was saying how, Michael and Janet were basically the bank for all the other all the other siblings, and so they were constantly having to fight these pathetic pieces of shit off. I mean, hey, Tito, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but these guys, and they're bugging his mom, and I mean, poor Katherine Jackson. She's inherited all the money, and and it's. She's basically the executor and the gatekeeper, and and so she has to take care of Prince and Blanket and Paris, the kids, while dealing with all this stuff. Settling up the debts and the bills, dealing with the kids and the family feuds, and all of that. So it is sad but true. The best thing that Michael ever did for his profitability as an industry or as a business was die. Because again, it's Michael Jackson estate still makes a lot of money. And then one last thing I want to go into. It's from the same article by Brian Hyatt that ran in 2009, and kind of as a last word that was showed how sad things had gotten. So quoting from that article, quote unquote, outside of the world of show business, where Michael was savvy enough to become the world's biggest singer and make a business move as brilliant as buying the Beatles publishing catalog, Jackson's self-image was pathologically distorted. Quote, he saw himself as a child, he really, really did, says a music industry source who worked with him. Quote, it was dangerous. I don't think he had the appropriate boundaries that as an adult would have as a child, because he didn't see himself as an adult. Was he having these sleepovers? Absolutely. He didn't deny it. He said there's nothing wrong with him sleeping with boys. In the course of that, might there have been some fondling? Probably. I don't know. I wasn't there. But the point is, his state of mind was really like a child. He was a peer to these kids. I know that disgusts a lot of people, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying as a fact, that really was his state of mind.
On this episode, Chris and I close the book on the two male icons of 1980s pop music and how their importance transcended the decades they dominated. For the next episode, we'll examine the music of another pair of artists, albeit much, much less commercially successful. This pair, however, were a collaborative duo who produced a series of folk rock masterpieces from 1974 to 1982 that influenced a litany of major artists and bands and continue to do so today. More importantly, these albums stand out as timeless works, as much or even more so than many of their contemporaries of their time. Listen in as the Curmudgeons examine Richard and Linda Thompson, A Legacy. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
Okay, so folks, we have completed the Michael story of this here Prince versus Michael Jackson saga, and we end with Prince's 2000s, his last 16 years of life. Arturo, tell us about late stage Prince and your impressions of all that happened.
Well, the last decade and a half of Prince's life and career did not get the publicity that Michael Jackson's did. There were no fights with the record label. Prince got that over with in the previous decade. No image rehabilitative documentaries that backfired and made him look worse. No lawsuits, no financial problems, and no charges of pedophilia the only real media attention Prince got when he started the Naughties was that he went back to his name as Prince. He ditched the symbol because the publishing deal that he had with Warner Brothers. I believe it was called. I forgot the name of it. Anyway, the publishing contract with Warner Brothers expired in May 2000. So it resulted in him going back to his name as a recording and touring artist. And that was big news for a little bit, especially for major Prince fans, as the new decade started. But instead, Prince, in his middle age, settled into a steady routine of recording and touring. His albums didn't sell in the quantities that they used to, but they still sold consistently well and decently well and charted in the top 10 most of the time. And they were bought by his significantly large hardcore fan base, by which point it became really hardcore.
Yes.
These numbers went down once paid streaming overtook paid downloads and physical media, but that's another discussion for another time regarding another topic.
Yes.
Yeah. However, it was during the noughties that his status as an unparalleled live performer solidified his standing in the pantheon of all-time great pop stars, selling out arenas all over the world while Michael Jackson was preoccupied with battling the media and destroying his face, literally and figuratively.
Yep.
This is when Prince gracefully settled into the role of pop music elder statesman and finally became at peace with his iconic status. Here's the thing, though. Aside from being that pop elder statesman, it's the noughties when Prince started to become a cool name to name check among younger artists in the pop, R&B, and even the hip hop spheres. I mean, it's really hard to imagine acts such as Outkast, Beyonce, Alicia Keys, Usher, The Roots, Justin Timberlake, even Kanye West without Prince influencing them in some substantial way or form.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, it's interesting, worth mentioning on that topic where all of a sudden, like Prince being this sort of celebrated oddball. It was really Chappelle that started this. That that Chappelle show bit with Prince and his guys playing Charlie Murphy and his guys in basketball and then having the pancakes.
Yeah.
That after that there was this flood of one confirmation of that story from Eddie Murphy, who confirmed it, but also like you started to get all kinds of other oddball stories after that, and then even after his death. Go on YouTube. After he died, there's a wonderful story that Jimmy Fallon and Questlove tell about Prince challenging Fallon to a game of ping pong at some basement club in New York. Yeah. And it's beautiful. But anyway, so Prince was a weird guy who had a lot of fun, and but like you said, it became, like you said, a cool name drop. That
totally.
I hung out at Prince's house and like drank Mai Tais and did some bowling, or like think of weird shit, and there was all these weird stories about Prince. But go ahead.
Anyway, but before we do the customary run through of his prolific discography during the 2000s and 2010s, which I will do, let's take a look at two specific live performances.
Correct.
That dropped people's jaws and shined, showing him to be the pop god that he was. All right. The first one was in March 2004, and this was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Prince was one of the three most prominent names who were inducted, along with ZZ Top and George Harrison as a solo artist, the latter having already been inducted several years earlier as a member of the Beatles. Outkast and Alicia Keys did the induction speech after a typically tight Prince performance, where he played a few of his big hits, Let's Go Crazy and Kiss being among them. He gave a brief, rather modest, yet touching speech, and he went off on his way. However, it was what happened at the end of the show that will always be remembered, thanks to YouTube, of course. George Harrison was scheduled to be the last person inducted. He died of cancer 3 years earlier. And his son, Donnie as in Dhani, not Donald, was to accept the award for him. Afterward, the producers of the show had scheduled an all-star band jam, including Tom Petty, Steve Winwood, and Jeff Lynne of ELO fame, and Donnie himself. And they were to perform a selection of Harrison's songs. The producers insisted that Prince be a part of this lineup, and so he was in. Now, Donnie Harrison has recounted this story several times throughout the years to both fellow musicians and writers, so this is corroborated. After it was announced to the crack band that Prince would come on stage to join the others during their performance of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Harrison's soaring ballad from the Beatles' White Album, for those who don't know or don't know albums, Donnie approached Prince for a chat. He came away from rather cordial, polite chat with the impression that Prince was going to try to steal the show with some fireworks guitar soloing. He then relayed this information to Tom Petty, the impromptu band leader for this event, and in Petty's typically laid back, insouciant manner, he just brushed it off. Whatever, man. Anyway, it's a good thing he did, because what followed was one of the single greatest performances in the history of the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Prince came in for the climactic solo at the end of the song. Eric Clapton did it for the original back in 1968, for those trivia buffs out there. And he proceeded to unleash a solo of sneering, snarling, nasty intensity that on camera, you can see Donnie Harrison caught off guard. Yeah. As he could do nothing but laugh nervously.
Yeah.
What he was hearing.
Yeah. It's like, I can't believe that Prince is actually playing this well on my dad's song.
Yeah. And yet, for as visceral as the solo was, a testament to Prince's singular brilliance as a guitar player was that he maintained the level of authentic emotion required to not just deliver the song, but bring it home. Yeah. And regardless, Prince's solo was so powerful that while everyone else on stage was paying tribute to Harrison, it seemed that Prince was paying tribute to Hendrix, who Harrison idolized, by the way. But anyway, after the performance ended, Prince seemingly took off his guitar and threw it into the audience in one fell swoop, and then literally strutted off the stage like JJ from Good Times.
But it's actually better than that. So Prince, his face, he doesn't belie any sort of emotion. It's just Prince, my impression of that is, okay, it's like, oh, you want me to play on While My Guitar Gently Weeps? Okay, fine. And he's just doing it like a pro. I mean, I'm just going to go up here and do what I do, go with the song. I'll get caught up in the moment. But the visual, and it's amazing. So he finishes the song. He does this how he could do that thing with the shoulder strap thing where it kind of spins around. He does that, takes it off, throws the guitar in the air. The next shot is him walking off the stage, and it's like, what happened to the fucking guitar?
It landed probably way off into the audience.
No, it's, dude, if you look at the video, he throws it, he's straight up in the air, vertical. And then 2 seconds later, no guitar. And so I'm assuming there was somebody up there that was catching it and taking it or whatever. Yeah. But literally, you look at the thing and okay, just plays it all cool, throws the thing in the air, walks off stage. Guitar never comes down. I mean,
I always assumed that the guitar went way into the audience off camera.
Nope. Maybe it did, but if you look at it, it looks like it's going straight up in the air, like it would have, it would have come down on his head, or like a foot in front of him, or 2 feet behind him, or he didn't hurl it. No, throws it just vertically in the air, and 2 seconds later, they do a long shot, no guitar. So, Prince had talent on loan from God. Apparently he had a guitar on loan from God too. And so it's just, he looks like this thing that's from outer space. He's up there with the most boring, Petty and Jeff Lynne, and they're all plaid wearing kind of guys, Yeah. And so he's like this alien playing with these guys. Obviously way better than all of them. Like you said, Donnie's laughing because he's oh, and he's probably thinking, oh, Dad would have loved this shit. And in the modern COVID world, there's a part of me that wants to think that Donnie was thinking, "Fuck you, Eric Clapton." You know, I really want to believe that. But yeah, that is one of the single greatest pieces of video ever. And so we implore you to do Prince, George Harrison. You probably don't even have to type in more than that, and it'll come.
No, all you gotta do is type Prince Hall of Fame 2004,
or just Prince George Harrison. It'll be the first thing that comes up.
Right.
So marvelous thing. Now talk about the second one.
The second one. Fast forward 3 years later to February 2007 for the special halftime performance of Super Bowl 41. Now, let me just say that I fucking despise Super Bowl halftime shows.
Me too.
I hate them. They're indulgent. They're bloated. They're corporatized. They're usually obnoxiously lip synced, and they're just overall fucking stupid.
They're stupid and they're phony.
And they're phony. And they represent everything that's wrong with America's ridiculously exaggerated sense of self-worth and its perverse obsession with celebrating it.
And it basically is, if there's parties to blame, Michael Jackson is probably the main guy to blame.
I'll get to that.
Because he did it first. But go ahead.
Yeah. If American football as a sport is the country's true national pastime, then the Super Bowl halftime show is the country's true national rest time, meaning it is the world's greatest justification to go to the bathroom and take the longest shit possible and maybe throw a good wank off in there for good measure. That being said, it took a genius artist of the caliber of Prince to take an exercise in gross, self-congratulatory, typically American ego sucking and make something moving and powerful and give it a modicum of depth. Now, here we go. It starts off bad enough. The Florida A&M University Marching Band comes onto the field doing Queen's We Will Rock You. Predictable and just
about that.
Yeah. Predictable and just yuck. However, something happens. First, a real thunderstorm goes off over the stadium, meaning real rain will come down very soon.
And real lightning.
Yeah, so maybe there is a God, and maybe he or she hates Super Bowl halftime shows as much as I do.
But there you
go. Anyway, off go some flames, and a huge stage shaped like Prince's patented love symbol emerges, with Prince doing the opening exhortation to Purple Rain's Let's Go Crazy. Now, listen, I'm talking as someone who didn't feel an ounce of anything when Whitney Houston sang the national anthem right before the Super Bowl in 1991. I didn't give a shit about that. I'm not a fan of national anthems and sporting events either, unless they're international competitions, but that's a different conversation.
There you go.
Even I have to admit, my nostalgic side got the best of me seeing his purple badness gearing up for what felt like an actual, honest-to-goodness, great performance. He sang for real. He played for real. His guitar was on fire, and it actually sounded great. Not even typically silly, crowd-pleasing vamps of, "Are we gonna go crazy?" seemed out of whack, Let's Go Crazy segues into the keyboard intro to 1999, and then it surprisingly segues into a shockingly good version of Baby I'm a Star, where unbelievably the marching band does not seem out of place. This is the true beginning of the medley that transitions to Creedence Clearwater Revival's Proud Mary, but done as the funky, soulful Ike and Tina Turner version. Again, the marching band adds and doesn't detract. Then everything stops on a dime. Then guitar riffage comes back for a perversely, and quote unquote perversely is the only adverb that I can use to describe this, a bluesy snippet of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. He was probably channeling the Hendrix version here as well.
And played brilliantly.
Played brilliantly, yeah. And that seemingly segues into the Foo Fighters' big hit, The Best of You. Now, let's pause here. The most impressive thing about this performance is not just that Prince took an otherwise horrendous Foo Fighters song and made it listenable. is that he actually made chicken salad out of chicken shit and made an actual good song out of one of the most maudlin pieces of crap Dave Grohl ever wrote. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah,
All
I was
right.
going to say that's saying something.
I mean, Prince's version manages to have 10 times more soul and actually rocks harder. Anyway, back to the performance. Prince's guitar has rarely sounded this loud and guttural and just downright nasty. The only other instrumentation throughout this whole gig is a drum kit, a keyboard set, and marching band horns. And even that is pushing it a bit as to being too much clutter, getting in the way of Prince's voice and guitar.
It wasn't. Didn't he play Johnny B. Good?
No, he didn't. He didn't.
I thought he played a Chuck Berry song in there.
Don't think he did.
No,
But anyway,
I know he did it in the Vegas review. He did it. I thought he did it during that performance. But go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, the song ends, and as actual rain is coming down, he launches into one of his greatest ballads and one of the greatest songs ever written, Purple Rain. The marching band tastefully only comes in toward the closing coda of the song, that na 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 na, that part, right?
Yes.
After Prince launches into a short but walloping solo with one of the most aggressive tones he's ever conjured out of the guitar, sounding not too far away from another legendary Minneapolis guitarist, Bob Mould of the legendary punk band Husker Du. In a mesmerizing and emotional performance, Prince brought genuine feeling and artistry to the otherwise dreary Super Bowl halftime show tradition by doing the opposite of what was and still is usually done. It was actually a minimalist performance with little instrumentation, relying on restraint and utilizing release only in select situations.
Yeah.
It was a classic case of doing more with less. You could argue that for this one time, the Super Bowl actually opened for Prince.
Yeah. Some thoughts about that. Like, you're right about the smoothness and it was professional. It was smooth. It was confident, but it was the Super Bowl. But you also have to put this in context. Like you said, it's at the stadium there in Miami, and it's pouring rain. He's in this, what must have been like a crushed velvet light blue suit.
Yeah.
Like this really fancy looking suit. You're on this stage, which had to have been slippery as hell. He's got these twin ladies that in what must have been like 8-inch, 9-inch heels, right? Or like, these enormously tall heels doing their dance routine. Again,
right.
In these skinny ass tall heels in the pouring rain on a slick stage, they do not miss anything. There's no twitches. It's all smooth. Prince just does his thing. He's got, at one point they do a close up during Purple Rain. He's got raindrops dripping off his chin. He must have had makeup. So I can't even imagine how he kept the suit clean and all of that. And so he's doing this. He's playing a real electric guitar in the pouring rain with the threat of lightning. And again, like you said, playing for real, and he just rocked the fuck out. Like you said, he does that little piece of Best of You. Like you said, he has that all along the Watchtower. I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, I thought that he had the Chuck Berry thing in there, but that was he was the reason he was doing this. Part of his motivation was later on that year, I think it was that spring or the summer, he launched a residency in Las Vegas, where essentially he was doing an old time rock and roll review. It's one of the great visual feats, I think, in the history of rock and roll. And like you said, it's the Super Bowl. It's the cheesiest thing. It's the biggest sellout thing you can do, but he makes it work. The only one of the Super Bowl performances that ever came close to that was U2's 5 years later, but that's largely for sentimental reasons because it was right after September 11th, and they also played for real, but nowhere.
Not 5 years earlier. You mean
5 years earlier? Did I say later?
Yeah, you said later.
Okay, well, get Back to the Future, bitch. Okay, so 2002. And so it's the only thing that even comes close to Prince. But I'm telling you, it was like something out of like a Japanese monster movie or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have thought that Kurosawa came up with this. It was crazy. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen on TV. and
Yeah.
really
And
cement.
by the way, as long as we're keeping score of points
Sure.
in regard to the Prince versus Michael Jackson rivalry, Prince's Super Bowl halftime show blows away Michael's from 1993,
Even
and
I'll admit that.
by a large margin. And so this is for those of you keeping score. These are more points in Prince's tally, and by this time, I think he's ahead.
Yeah. No, I would say so. Well, I mean, in terms of Super Bowl, in terms of quantity, yeah. At this point, like Michael's, if I had to rank him, Michael's is the third best Super Bowl halftime performance, which is not saying much, but it was a really, all things considered, he invented the template for it. It was really great performance, but it was badly lip synced, very, very badly lip synced, as in dubbed Italian softcore porn bad lip syncing. But but Prince blows him out of the water here. So yeah, Michael invented the template. Prince did it way, way, way better than anybody could ever imagine it could be done.
All right, now we reach to the point of the Prince retrospective when we get into the albums.
All right, cue the Benny Hill music.
Or the Lone Ranger music, I think is more appropriate.
or the Lone Ranger music. We do not have a copyright or a license on either, but go ahead.
Yeah. Starting in 1995, Prince started releasing his multitude of albums, mostly through his own NPG record label. And from the turn of the decade onward, it was exclusively through MPG, with distribution deals alternating between certain major labels here and there. So let's begin the quick hit run through sprint of all of Prince's albums from 2001 through the end of his life. As you can imagine, with someone who is so prolific, the quality widely varied.
Yeah,
that's why you, the listener, have us curmudgeons to sift through filler and find the killer in this quite underrated, actually, and overlooked period of Prince's career.
Yes.
Let us begin.
Now.
Okay, 2001, The Rainbow Children. This marks the beginning of what I call Prince's very brief esoteric period, meaning he merges high lyrical concepts with a kind of jazz funk fusion that he has always threatened to make up to this point. This one is the best of that bunch. It's a concept album that serves as a meditation on the history of the African American experience that incorporates themes of spirituality, sexuality, and of course, racism. It holds together surprisingly well. Standout tracks, the jazz, funk, rock mashout of Family Name, which even though comes toward the end of the record, it can easily serve as the album's lyrical mission statement and theme. You got the luscious funk of Destruction and the ferocious funk jam and black solidarity anthem of The Everlasting Now. This is a good one. Bookmark this one. Next, 2002, One Night Alone. This was released only to members of Prince's NPG Music Club, hence why it didn't chart. This is also where you come to if you want to hear Prince in intimate solo voice and solo piano mode. Interesting cover. His Purple Badness takes on Joni Mitchell with his version of A Case of You. So if you're into that side of Prince, check that out. Otherwise, nothing special. Next, 2003, he had two albums. The first one, Expectation. The first of two all-instrumental jazz fusion albums that Prince would release this year. Very much in the flavor of the 1970s musical excursions of Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, and Weather Report. It's surprisingly rather dull and lifeless. Best appreciated by musicians who are obsessed with complexity. So yeah, you can kind of skip this one. The next one, 2003, same year, like I said, News, or N-E-W-S. It's the second jazz fusion album of the year, and this one's better. I guess Prince's out there experiments are best when he keeps a bit of the funk and a bit of the rock in the mix. Standout track, the third track, West. The other three songs are titled North, South, and East. N-E-W-S.
Oh, he's so clever.
Yeah. So this one's okay. This one's the more interesting of the two jazz fusion albums. All right. Next, 2004 Musicology. I'll talk a little bit more about this. This is the year Prince gets inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And it's also the year, not surprisingly, Prince finally decides to get back in touch with the mainstream audience with his official comeback album. Its intent tipped off by the fact that Columbia Records distributed the album. It was commercially successful, peaking at number 3 in both the UK and US charts, going double platinum in the US. It also garnered a few R&B Grammy Awards and winning 2, both for his vocal performance, underscoring that beyond being a dazzling multi-instrumentalist, he was also an incredible singer. In retrospect, though, it isn't really that good. It sounds less like peak Prince and more like a facsimile of peak Prince. One cannot escape the feeling that he's just going through the motions here, like your boy Michael did in 2001. Even Mojo magazine offered that it was better produced and performed than it was actually written. Nevertheless, even a mediocre Prince album still has some great songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. One thing to mention, though, that unlike Michael, though, Michael had all the pressure in the world on his shoulders. And so he was trying to make the most like pristine thing. Like he actually was trying. He thought he just was artistically bankrupt. Whereas at that point, Prince was just basically playing with house money.
Exactly.
That's the difference. It's like both of them had nothing in the tank, but there were different motivations. So
true.
Worth pointing
Very
out.
good. Very good point. Now, the good songs on Musicology. The title track, Musicology, is funkier than an elephant's foreskin, and it mixes in vintage Prince in the mid-'80s synth stabs. Really the best song on the whole thing. Dear Mr. Man is a slow jam funk that serves as Prince's most poignant and sharpest attack to date, mind you, on socioeconomic inequality, especially in the African American community, and contrasting it with all the government money being spent on the military and the futility of the two-party system. Yes, Prince jams a lot into this song. This is especially poignant considering 2004 was the election year when George W. Bush was reelected. However, an addendum to Prince's 2004, for those of you out there, he released 2 more albums, The Chocolate Invasion and The Slaughterhouse, during this year that were available solely through his NPG Music Club website. I admit I haven't heard these, but I'm sure the albums in their entirety are on YouTube. Listeners, please feel free to provide your own input on these albums or any other Prince albums mentioned on this or any other episode in the Prince versus Michael Jackson series via email at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or via Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
Yeah, it bears mentioning, by the way, that nobody monetized the internet like Prince.
No.
He taught everybody how to do up until his death. If you ever tried to find Prince songs on YouTube, if you ever wondered why he couldn't do it, it's because the guy had the single greatest copyright police in the history of the world. And so there's a reason the guy was worth 9 figures when he died. He actually knew what he was doing from the very, very, very beginning, and stuff like this, like the fan club kind of model through the internet.
Right.
He was just a master of that kind of stuff.
Oh,
but
totally.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Next, 2006, 3121. His first U.S. #1 album on the Billboard chart since the Batman soundtrack.
No shit.
In 1989. This is a marked improvement from Musicology. This is way better. Elements of the jazz fusion excursions of the early noughties are melded to the traditional Prince-esque musical tropes of Musicology and bolsters the mix with much better, much stronger, much more inspired songwriting. Standout tracks: the infectious and indelible synth soul pop of Lolita, where Prince warns the underage girl, "Lolita, you're sweeter, but you'll never make a cheetah out of me." So yeah, he doesn't have sex with the underage girl.
Good
He makes
for him.
it sure. The best single from the album, Black Sweat, is a steamy electro-funk sex jam and was a genuine hit, charting at number 60 on the Billboard Hot 100 and charting high in several European countries. And of course, the other great song is Satisfied, a beautiful, luscious, old-school R&B love jam. Next, 2007, Planet Earth. This is his most streamlined pop for a pop marketplace album in quite some time. As Robert Christgau, one of this podcast's favorite music writers,
Correct.
put in his review for MSN Music at the time, he said, quote, "This album is Viva Las Vegas and later for Viagra, but not never." Whatever that means.
Okay.
Whatever. Like most albums that are blatantly commercial, it's only the singles that warrant attention. Guitar, the leadoff single, is indelible pop rock with one of the simplest yet catchiest guitar lines Prince has ever come up with. Chelsea Rogers pulses with a pure disco funk that predates Daft Punk's immensely popular retro disco revival by 6 years and should have been a huge hit. Suddenly, and seriously, dude, it's better than Daft Punk's Get Lucky. I'm not joking.
I don't doubt it. I certainly don't doubt it.
Yeah. Next, 2009, Lotus Flower, as well as MPLS Sound and Elexir. Now, before you go, oh no, another triple album of mostly filler and outtakes, let me state that this isn't really a triple album in the unified 3 records as one statement sense, a la the Clash's Sandinista. What it really is a set of 3 different albums that were sold together, hence why each disc was given a different name.
Kind of like a box set, basically.
Yeah. So why did he decide to release this music in this way? He never said why. I have no idea. His name is Prince, and he is funky.
And he's a weird guy. I mean, and at this point, you know, the good thing about not being beholden to being like he used to put it, being a slave to a label, is you do whatever the fuck you want. And I think Prince, totally. I think Prince just kind of, in some ways, like Prince had a mischievous side to him. And so I almost wonder if like half the stuff he did, especially in this late period, he just was doing it to just fuck with people and just, make them wonder.
Sure. There was always that. Prince always liked to shock people. Anyway, Lotus Flower is by far the standout album of this 3-album set. Leave it to Prince to save his finest record of the noughties for the end of the noughties.
There you go.
This is a great, great album. It's his 4th straight album to debut in the top 3 of the Billboard album chart. And he interestingly goes back to the jazz fusion ventures in the early part of the decade and goes a step further from the News album. On that album, the latter, he injected his brand of jazz fusion with a bit of funk and rock to sweeten it up. With Lotus Flower, Prince, the mad musical scientist, decides to give his jazz funk a bit of a Purple Majesty overdose, meaning the whole gamut of his irresistible and unique R&B, soul, funk, rock, blues hybrid style. So it's that with a little bit of the jazz fusion. And the result is a musically consistent and unified album that seamlessly flows from one track to the other, mixing jazzy pieces, love jams, sex jams, funk jams, ballads, rockers, and examinations of race and class before critical race theory even entered the mainstream lexicon.
Yep.
Standout tracks, the whole freaking album should be listened to.
Yeah, Lotus Flower is a good record. That's like one of the 2 or 3 late period records from Prince I'm familiar with. Just awesome stuff. Like you said, like you said, a smidge of diffusion, but it's basically, it sounds like a Prince record.
Yeah, and just to say, when you listen to the whole album, you can skip track 3, which is the silly, insipid version of Tommy James and the Shondells' Crimson and Clover.
Oh, come on! I mean, there's no such thing as a bad version of that. Even Joan Jett hit that one out of the park. I mean, come on.
Well, come on. Prince could do better than that. Anyway, the other 2 albums, MPLS Sound, MPLS being abbreviation for Minneapolis, get it, functions basically as the outtakes from the near musical perfection of Lotus Flower. And you could tell Prince had something special as is with Lotus Flower and didn't want to mess with the running order by like leaving the MPLS Sound songs away from them. Nevertheless, MPLS Sound has some great tracks. Chocolate Box, featuring Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest on rapped verses, is dance pop perfection and a refreshing throwback, not a recycling, of his early 1980s synth funk. It's one of the best. It was one of the best singles that he put out in the noughties. You're Gonna See Me is another in a long line of one of Prince's underrated specialties, the mid-tempo love ballad. And Dance for Me is a new wave inflected dance floor killer of the kind Prince is unbeatable at, and with a gnarly distorted guitar solo to boot. And that brings us to the third one, Elexir. It's really a collaborative album with then up-and-coming R&B singer and fashion model Bria Valente, who was from the Minneapolis area and was, surprise, surprise, Prince's girlfriend at the time.
Big
It's
shot.
a pretty unremarkable set of smooth R&B, soul, and soft jazz pop, clearly an attempt by Prince to promote his latest ingenue. You can skip this. Okay. Next, 2010. And it's the number 20 and the word 10. Here we get one of the legitimately overlooked gems in Prince's entire catalog. Easily, in my opinion, his best album since 1992's Love Symbol. Yes, following the direction laid out by the previous years should have been smash hit Chocolate Box, he goes for a 21st century update on his classic early to mid 1980s sound, particularly 1999 Purple Rain and Around the World in a Day. That sounds awesome. Guess what? It is awesome. While this would typically come off like an artist recycling themselves, because Prince had not done this kind of music in such a long time, it actually comes off as refreshing and somewhat new. The hooks are great, the funk is deep, the rhythms are in high gear, and the sexuality simmers, for as much as sexuality can simmer for a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about pretty lukewarm. That must be on a dimmer.
Yeah. Recommended tracks, listen to the whole damn album. It's fucking great. That and Lotus Flower. Those two are the 1-2 wallop punch of the naughties that you should all listen to. Now, it's time to take a little break and mention that from 2011 to 2013, there was very little activity by Prince, at least compared to the whirlwind of touring, recording, and record releasing that the public was used to seeing from him. He did a mid-sized British festival called the Hop Farm Festival in the summer of 11, and a brief U.S. tour in spring 13 with his new all-female band called Third Eye Girl. He released only a handful of standalone singles via streaming services and other download services. So it's very little activity. There's a reason for this. The Prince camp has been generally elusive about this, but a lot has been written by different sources that have been corroborated. And it's the fact that around this time, Prince started to have serious problems with his hips, likely a degenerative hip condition.
Yeah.
And by extension, quite possibly problems with his back as well.
Yeah.
You have to realize, in addition to being a musician for most of his life, he was also a very physical performer whose a very taxing touring schedule for over 20 years couldn't have done wonders for his joints.
Oh, I know. I mean, well, the hips, remember, the guy could do like a split like nobody's business. So like doing all those things. Yeah. I mean, you do that. I mean, with his touring schedule, you figure what those last 15 years, really at least 10 years, if you go like 01 to 10, he was probably doing what, like 100 shows a year still.
Yeah, and he was raking in the millions. The opposite of Michael Jackson. He was not in debt at all.
No, he was very, very, very much in the black, but he was out there shaking his ass. Literally, he was a sexy MF shaking his ass to the point where he was basically he was like a kind of a dog with dysplasia. Like he was in bad shape.
And here's the thing. Prince was also, like I mentioned earlier, a Jehovah's Witness. And in that sect of Christianity, it's considered a sin to mutilate your body with open hole, put open holes in your body in any manner.
Yep.
Giving a doctor permission to perform surgery on you is considered self-mutilation according to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So that means any kind of operation was off the table as far as Prince was concerned. So where else could he go to alleviate the pain? Simple. Drugs.
Yep.
And in Prince's case, painkiller drugs of the opioid variety. Naturally, he became addicted, very similarly to Michael Jackson, yet another similarity in their parallel lives. This addiction and the lack of treatment for his worsening hip problems would lead to a physical decline that would eventually dovetail into his eventual death. But before that, there are a few more albums to quickly, and I mean quickly because they aren't that good, go through. You have 2014, Artificial Age, one of his two albums in 14, and it should have been only one because this album is a turgid, dull, lifeless Prince by numbers affair.
Yeah, pretty much.
It was recorded all by himself. Nothing wrong there. But it was also recorded all digitally, and it sounds just as lifeless.
Yeah,
it almost sounds like a bad parody of Prince.
Yeah, the funny part was I think he was hoping that it was going to be a comeback record of sorts because he did a huge media blitz. It was Artificial Age, and then the other he came. You're going to talk about another album that he had come out like very shortly after that in 2014. That he was doing cover stories all over the place, or at least trying to. I think that, and so it's kind of funny that I guess maybe he was thinking he was all awesome with his digital self. And must have really been proud of those things because he was trying to blitz at that point. Like he ended up on the cover of Essence, I think it's at one point. And
he was on the cover of Mojo.
Yeah, Mojo, and he was supposed to be on the cover of Rolling Stone, but as I understand it from friends of mine that worked there, there was a issue over the cover photo where he wanted, there was a specific photo that he wanted them to run that they wouldn't, and he wouldn't let them shoot them. But anyway, that's besides the point. The point being is that these albums, which are lousy, were Prince, I think, was styling them as his sort of grand comeback into the mainstream.
Yeah, the Gold Artificial Age, the only decent track on it is the Gold Standard. It's the only track appropriating any kind of inspiration. Now, Electrum Electrum, the other album, this is a little better. It's the only album he recorded with his all-female band, Third Eye Girl. And it's notable because it's the closest he ever came to doing a full-on rock album or a full-on funk rock album. And there are some good songs. It's not great, but it's not as embarrassing as Artificial Age. Pretzel Body Logic and the title track sound like Prince getting in touch with his inner Led Zeppelin. Funk and roll jams like the Funkadelic tribute that it's supposed to be, and all the better for it. So it's not that bad. It's by far the best of those two 2014 albums. And then in 2015, he had his final albums, Hit and Run Phase 1 and Hit and Run Phase 2, released 3 months apart from each other. Both albums are rather inconsistent affairs, but Phase 1 has the more interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Shut This Down has some of the best hip-hop textures he had utilized since Sign of the Times, and is another in a long line of should-have-been hit singles. It's a really, really great track. Fall in Love Tonight is a blissful slice of vintage 2010 streamlined pop, the kind that Maroon 5 would have pimped their mothers for.
Sure.
X's Face is an incredible, dark, seductive hybrid of trip-hop and modern hip-hop that serves as a, by now, typical Prince commentary on poverty and life in the inner cities. Phase 2 isn't as inspired with its creativity, but tracks like Stare and Screwdriver are pleasant funk and pop rock jams. Okay, so this brings us to the end of Prince's recorded output.
There you go. And that is a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff.
Now here's the thing. He got back on the touring horse in 2014, like you alluded to, Chris, to support Artificial Age and Electrum Electrum, while 2015 saw him take the stage only twice, one time at his Paisley Park estate at a show titled Dance Rally for Peace, and another at Baltimore's Royal Farms Arena called Rally for Peace, both of which were tribute shows to Freddie Gray, a young unarmed African American man
Yeah.
who was murdered by Baltimore police.
Yeah.
In February 2016, he did a tour of small capacity venues in Australia and New Zealand called the Piano and a Microphone Tour, which was, yep, you guessed it,
A piano and a microphone.
yeah, just Prince accompanied by nothing more than a custom piano. He had just started an American version of that same tour when he canceled it in April 2016 due to illness. And this leads us to the end. The illness that was cited by his representatives at the time was influenza, but that was not the case.
No.
On the plane ride back to Minneapolis, Prince, in fact, was found unresponsive, and the plane had to make an emergency landing in Moline, Illinois, in order to rush him to a hospital. He was given naloxone,
Yep.
a drug normally given to wake people up from opioid overdoses. On April 20th, Prince's people contacted a doctor named Howard Kornfeld, who was a specialist in pain treatment and addictive medicine, to give him medical help. An appointment was made between Kornfeld and Prince for the 22nd, and an appointment for Prince to do a physical exam was scheduled on the 21st. Unfortunately, on the morning of the 21st, a 911 call was made to the Carver County Sheriff's Office claiming a dead body was found in an elevator on Prince's Paisley Park estate. The caller was apparently Kornfeld's son, who had arrived that morning to talk to Prince about a treatment plan before the formal meeting with Kornfeld Sr. EMTs arrived. They identified the body as Prince's. Duh, he's one of the most famous guys in the world. They tried to resuscitate him, but couldn't due to the fact that he had already been dead for 6 hours. An autopsy revealed that he died from an overdose of fentanyl,
Yeah.
a very strong and highly addictive opioid.
Yeah.
He was 57 years old.
Yeah.
Now-
Fentanyl is a crisis for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
become a real bad crisis. But say what you were going to say, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah. Being twice divorced and having no children that we know of, and he had no will. According to Minnesota state probate law, no spouse and no kids meant that Prince's full sister, Tika Nelson, and his 5 half-siblings are the only ones with a claim to his estate. As of this episode that you're listening to now, the estate remains unsettled and is currently and temporarily being run by a company called Bremer Trust.
Yep, and that's what they do. I mean, so you know, as an attorney who I've done some writing about what they call intestacy in the last year. It's not a good idea to die without a will, and especially if you've got lots of money and lots of assets, and you also have lots of siblings.
Right.
Because if you don't know what Prince's wishes are, then there's going to be a whole lot of it's going to be like, pigs in a trough, and it's like the one that gets in there first, it's going to be like a battle. So it's unfortunate. There's a few thoughts I have about Prince. I think that his death was really shocking. Because
no one knew he was an addict.
No, there was no, there was no history of rehab. There was no history of erratic behavior. It wasn't like Whitney, who Whitney Houston only lost 20 pounds and was acting weird. And there was speculation several years before we had a confirmation that she was a cocaine addict. It wasn't like Michael, who, had very famous legal battles, or Weiland or anybody. So there was no criminal record. There was no erratic behavior. There was no sort of even rehab kind of stuff. We didn't even know that, a lot of artists would have interviews and saying, hey, I've got these arthritic, or I need to get a fake knee or a fake hip. Like these older artists, they start talking about their pain. None of that. And so out of the blue, he drops dead. And then we find out all the stuff that he had, he had overdosed on a plane and all of this other stuff. And it's it's really, really sad. Like you said, the narrative, it's kind of darkly funny that the doctor's son is at the bottom of Paisley Park at the elevator. Prince is coming down the elevator to meet him, dies on the way down. And so essentially
Yeah.
what happens is that the doctor's son and maybe like one of Prince's female assistants are standing there waiting for him. Door opens, Prince is there dead.
Yeah.
So I can't even imagine the visual for that. And
He was dead for 6 hours in that elevator.
yeah, I mean they were saying that, but I think it was either they were expecting him to come down and he didn't, and then maybe that's what happened, that they had to pry it open, or I thought it was just that the elevator door opened and he was sitting there dead. It was
Well, I think what it may have been is that they went there in the morning. Okay, let's go see Prince. And they pressed the elevator, opened. Oh shit!
yeah,
Yeah.
and he was, yeah, they found him in the, or yeah, basically one of those types of things. But it speaks to the whole fentanyl thing that it is really insidious. I mean, most of the heroin overdoses in this country are not really because of the heroin; it's because of the fentanyl. That
Yeah.
people are taking all this poison heroin because it's
Yeah.
cut with fentanyl, and fentanyl as a painkiller. That's what killed Tom Petty as well.
Yep.
Yeah, Petty is another one that all of a sudden, we had no idea.
Yeah.
We knew he was a huge pothead, but we didn't know that he was hooked on
Right.
that stuff. So it was a real shock, and it it wasn't sad with Prince. It was just shocking. It still
Yeah.
was, and because there was so much music and he was so
Right.
prolific, it still doesn't feel like he's dead.
Yeah.
Michael hadn't done anything for years and was a pariah when he died, and so everybody was grieving or lamenting, but also was like, well, that's kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
people had been expecting something to, like, the shit to hit the fan for years, whereas Prince still feels like he's around. I mean,
Right.
the other interesting thing, one last note, and then I'll let you wrap it up. We talked about Taylor Swift a couple episodes ago, like re-recording her stuff in a
Yeah.
Masters fight. Prince was talking about going back and re-recording his old stuff. He was talking about, like, yay, wouldn't it be kind of cool if I went and did 1999 now, based on everything I know or where I am, or if I re-recorded Purple Rain or re-recorded Sign of the Times. And so in his case, it might not have been facsimiles. It was maybe been just sort of, here's my take now, 30 years older, on 1999. And so we lost the chance to hear that, which would have been utterly fascinating.
I would not have wanted to hear that. As a Prince fan, his classic stuff should be fossilized and left alone. I agree. I think he should have just kept going. Had he not died, just kept doing new. I'd rather hear him keep doing new music than re-record his old songs. I don't like when people re-record their old songs. I really don't.
Yeah, and well, here's a question, by the way, and maybe this is indicting myself here. Have you heard the posthumous one that he came out with in 21, the Welcome to America, or whatever the name of that record is?
I'm glad. I was going to mention that in my final thing about Prince.
Go ahead.
My final words. Okay, now I'm going to mention my final words on Prince.
There you go.
With a lot of artists, and a testament to his greatness is that you have a lot of bands and artists who have a lot of stuff in their archive, and they're usually outtakes, stuff left on the cutting room floor, and stuff like that. For most bands and most artists, that material in the vault is vastly inferior to what they officially put out. In Prince's case, that's not the case. Welcome to America is an entire album that he recorded in 2010. Okay. Around the time of the album 2010. And he recorded it and then he shelved it. He after he recorded it, he mixed it, he got it all set to go, and he said, you know what? I'm not releasing it. And the reason, according to interviews, the people who knew him, that he didn't release it is that he thought the lyrical subject matter was too dark. And at this point, in his career, in his life, Prince was all about being positive. So hence out comes the album 2010, which is a very, some would say lightweight, but I would say, deliciously and endearingly lightweight, because it really does harken back to his 80s sound, unlike any other album he had ever done after the 80s. But anyway, Welcome to America. Musically, it's daring, it's eclectic, it's dark and it's edgy, And lyrically, it's probably the most political that he's ever been in his entire career. Like seriously, this he recorded this in 2010. There are lyrics on this album that are like genuine Black Lives Matter anthems before Black Lives Matter became a thing.
Oh yeah.
He was on that shit way earlier, and the album's a masterpiece. Like, had he released this in 2010, it may not have been a commercial blockbuster, but it would have been a critical triumph, and it would have been hailed as his best album since Sign of the Times. It
Yeah.
really is that. It really is that good. Last year I said Idol's Crawler is my album of the year. If I want to really say I would say this is the second best album, and it's a reissue.
Yeah. I was gonna say. I need to hear this, but I had heard about that, and you're right. Prince was a fan in interviews for years where he used to brag about, my best stuff I haven't released. Like I purposely hold back my best stuff, as kind of gems for a later date. It's like he likes to stash away. And
Welcome to America is astonishing. It's like it almost makes me pissed off at him. Why the fuck did you hold this back?
Yeah.
Like, this would have been his comeback record.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing, but it's like tantamount to or parallel like Neil Young back in 73, 74, who like basically shelved about 5 albums that have come out in the last 10 years in this archive space. But it's the kind of thing when you're that prolific and that good, it's kind of like, and that eccentric. It's like, who the hell knows what you're going to do? So, but that was Prince. Again, another sad demise, but in a different way because, Prince was one of these guys. There was still a lot of life left. He's 57. He wasn't done. I mean, he was. He would have gotten to a point where maybe at 62, 63, he would have made another masterpiece.
Yeah, sure.
So, the pressure was off. And so with that, Bon Voyage Prince. And that is the end of the final chapter of Prince versus Michael Jackson. We hope that we have done both guys well. Tell us your thoughts, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com.
And now, folks, it is time for a very special edition of The Vault. It's the swinging 60s edition of The Vault, where Chris and I will both take great albums from the mid to late 60s period. Lost. Well, one of these albums isn't very lost because it's by a legendary artist, but the other album is kind of lost. And we're going to talk about them. And these were two visionary artists. One of them was in a band. One of them was a solo act. But Chris, I'm going to take the band. Are you ready to hear about this one?
Yeah. Tell me what band you're taking and extracting and out and mining out of the vault.
Yes. 14 episodes ago, episode 12 to be exact, we did an episode devoted to interesting and or unconventional versions of Bob Dylan songs. One of my picks was the 13th Floor Elevators' shimmering, drugged out yet beautiful version of It's All Over Now, Baby Blue from their 1967 album Easter Everywhere. For this episode's installment of The Vault, the theme is swinging 60s, like I said, and I will dive into that album as a whole. Now, for our loyal curmudgeonly listeners out there who may not know, the 13th Floor Elevators were arguably the first psychedelic rock band. At the very least, they were the first band to call their music psychedelic rock in the mid-1960s. They were true pioneers, and they not only opened doors that other more prominent bands walked through, they virtually created the style, the aesthetic, and the language of psychedelic rock that is still being explored today by bands such as the OCs, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Wand, and Slift. Now, these guys didn't just talk the talk. They walked the walk with a druggy zest. They were known to not just play every show high on LSD, they also wrote songs while high on LSD, and they usually recorded in the studio tripping on LSD. Who are these guys? They formed in December 1965 in Austin, Texas, when 18-year-old singer-songwriter extraordinaire Rocky Erickson left his poppy garage band, The Spades, to join lead guitarist Stacy Sutherland, drummer John Ike Walton, and bassist Benny Thurman, who were in a band called the Lingsmen. Instrumental in getting these guys together was Tommy Hall, an aspiring poet, drug fiend, and LSD dealer. Yes, you heard that last part right. That's how he made his money. In the band, Hall would become their main lyricist and play the electric jug, which is a quote unquote instrument, and I use that term loosely, that sounds like 2 gallons of water bubbling and boiling in a pot and mic'd up for maximum effect. Just a month after forming the band, they signed with Texan independent label International Artists and recorded a single called You're Gonna Miss Me, which slowly grew from being a regional hit in Texas to an even bigger hit throughout the western parts of the country, to a national hit that peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Pop chart. Now, throughout 1966, they toured extensively in Texas, and mostly in Texas. The reason for this was a marijuana bust that happened at Tommy Hall's home in January of that year. Very little pot was actually found, and stories circulated that the cops actually planted pot in Erickson's possession. But but this being Texas in the 1960s, you can imagine that being busted with pot was akin to being busted with heroin or crystal meth in modern times.
For what it's worth, that's still the case, as I live in Texas, and they still believe in reefer madness down here. But go ahead.
What would have resulted in serious jail time for all the band members and their immediate entourage ended up in them getting off on probation due to Erickson's mom being in the same church as the district attorney's wife, who convinced her husband to move the trial up a few weeks in order to avoid a stricter judge. True story. The probation meant that they could only leave Texas with a special permission from the courts. And at the time, they could only be away at the time being away from Texas could only be limited, usually 3 weeks at a time. So, not to be deterred, the band took these periods to tour in California, performing in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, the latter of which saw them perform at famous venues such as the Fillmore and the Avalon, alongside the Grateful Dead, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Moby Grape, and Big Brother and the Holding Company, i.e. the band that Janis Joplin was in. They also made 2 nationally televised appearances on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, and it was during this intense period of touring that the Elevators honed the original material that would end up being on their debut album. While Tommy Hall's lyrics mostly dealt with achieving a higher level of consciousness through copious LSD use. Yes, they were that brazen and open about it. The music, which was mostly driven by Erickson and lead guitarist Sunderland, was surprisingly quite unpsychedelic. It sounded more like a revved up, aggressive folk rock, almost proto-punk in its approach. And they didn't look like typical San Francisco hippies or even the LA equivalents. They wore flannel shirts, denim jeans, sometimes corduroy jackets and pants. They looked like scruffy grunge punk versions of hippies. And this is partially what would endear them 10 years later to punk rockers enamored with the mid-60s garage rock boom. In late 66, they released the seminal classic album, The Psychedelic Sounds of the 13th Floor Elevators, which even for its time sounds a bit crude in regard to production and sound quality. In Paul Drummond's wonderful book, The 13th Floor Elevators, A Visual History, he puts forth via interviews with people in the elevator circle that the owners of the label, unbeknownst to the band, went into the studio with a Houston radio DJ to remix the album right before its release with the purpose of burying the zealous pro-drug message in the lyrics in the mix. To not make it seem so obvious. Being on an indie label with poor distribution meant that their debut sold only 40,000 copies. Good for an indie label, bad for a band with higher ambitions. This led to perpetual tensions between the band and label, and there were tensions within the band as well. The drummer and bassist left the band shortly after the album's release due to the pair's disagreement with Erickson and Hall over the latter duo's insistence on their lyrical pro-drug message. Upon getting a new rhythm section, the Elevators returned to the studio in September 1967, right after the epochal Summer of Love, to record the follow-up to Psychedelic Sounds, and the result was a near masterpiece and a classic of the era. In Easter Everywhere, the intense rocking out of the debut album is toned down a bit and allows more space for achingly beautiful, mind-melting guitar textures, and it ultimately allows the listener more space to focus on the lyrics, which got even more extreme in their acid-fried wonkiness. The band were on a mission to convert the masses to the gospel of LSD since their inception, and that mission reaches a fever pitch on the opening track and first single, the powerful and immortal 8-minute epic Slip Inside This House. Yep. Now, how to describe a song that serves as the most unabashed, eloquent testament to the transformative powers of LSD ever recorded? Well, listen to the words, man. Here we go. Bedouin tribes ascending from the egg into the flower. Alpha information sending state within the heaven shower. From disciples, the unending subtleties of river power. They slip inside this house as they pass by. If your limbs begin dissolving in the water that you tread, all surroundings are evolving in the stream that clears your head. Find yourself a caravan like Noah must have led, and slip inside this house as you pass by.
Yeah, at least the music was good. Yeah. Well,
and those are just the first three stanzas. Groovy, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say who knew that those giraffes on the boat were all fucked up.
I mean, seriously though, in all seriousness, the Elevators are one of those few bands, if not perhaps the only band, that transcended psychedelic rock as a nifty little subgenre to a band that actually makes you want to take acid.
Yeah, no, I mean they definitely were very reverent and very poetic about it. But I will say this: of all the Ken Kesey era bands, their stuff was pretty.
Yeah.
By this point, Easter Everywhere, like you said, they had put in enough space and had advanced enough that it was still wonky. It was still basically a pro drug message jingle, like an hour long druggy jingle,
right.
But it was pretty. And it had a depth to it, like even the Dead during this period. Like we've said before, Anthem of the Sun, I can't call an album. It's a collage of interesting pieces, some of which are beautiful and some of which are shitty.
Yeah.
This album is just pretty. Like obviously that Dylan cover, a lot of it, it's just really, really pretty. And like I said, goofy, but you can still respect these guys as musicians for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple more tracks worth listening to. I've Got Levitation. It was the second, great title. was the second single from the album, and a reasonable regional hit in Texas. It was, with the lyrical subject matter. The lyrical subject matter, let's face it, is quite obvious. I've Got Levitation, but the song glides with the grooviest chord progression and lead guitar line that the Rolling Stones would have killed for. And then you have the final track, Postures, quote parentheses, leave your body behind, of course, is a mid-tempo beauty. It's almost a ballad that manages to take their patented transcendence via LSD mission statement and turn it into something approaching both elegy and desperation. They really they tread that line in a wonderfully effective way. Easter Everywhere was released in late October 1967, and it sold even less than their first album at 10,000 copies.
Yikes.
Some record labels just sucked at promotion and getting their acts out there, and international artists, a label run by lawyers with almost no musical background or knowledge, they were one of them.
Yeah.
The band didn't do themselves any favors, though. Between the constant revolving door of musicians, guitarist Sunderland's increasing heroin addiction, electric jugman Hall's failed attempts at power grabbing, and frontman Erickson's his eroding mental stability due to constant LSD use.
Yeah.
The band was doomed. The latter situation, but Rocky Erickson, that's the most heartbreaking and well publicized aspect of the band's story. Starting in 1968, Erickson embarked on an in and out spell at an Austin mental institution that lasted almost 2 years. When he wasn't breaking out of the asylum, yes, breaking out. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. He broke out of the nut house. Yep.
Yeah, to he would break out of the asylum to abuse drugs, particularly acid and shooting up amphetamines.
Yikes.
When he wasn't doing that, he was in the asylum taking experimental psychiatric drugs that messed him up even more. Toward the end of 1969, rather than face a prison term for a felony marijuana charge, Erickson chose to enter a maximum security psychiatric hospital where he stayed for 5 years. The Fracturing Band made some unfinished recordings in early '68 that frankly went nowhere. And Hall, Erickson, and Sutherland played their last show in April of that year. By this time, their live shows had become erratic and lacking energy. The drug use that initially fueled them now just sapped them of their energy. That didn't stop international artists from putting out more Elevators product, though. In August of that year, they put out a supposed live LP loaded with fake audience noise and applause, of course, that was actually made up of demos and outtakes dating back to 1966. Yeah, that didn't sell well either. To his credit, Stacey Sutherland tried to keep the flag of the 13th floor Elevators by keep that flag flying. By now, the only original member, he cobbled together a rhythm section in the second half of 1968 to record some sessions. The label pulled together some of the uncompleted session recordings and released the official, quote unquote, final album by the 13th floor Elevators, Bull of the Woods, in March 1969. Hall and Erickson appeared on only a couple of the tracks, and frankly, it was an Elevators album in name only. The soul and spirit of the band was long gone by now. Good news, though. The band's rehabilitation began in earnest with the release of the 1972 compilation, Nuggets, Original Artifacts, or Artifacts as it's spelled, from the first psychedelic era, 1965 to 68, with its focus on garage rock bands that would eventually have a big influence on the oncoming punk rock movement.
Yes, one of the single most important album or
box
sets or album collection sets ever released.
Yeah, definitely.
Incredible.
From then, the band's legacy and reputation have continued to grow to the point that they're more well known now than they ever were in their existence. Bands and artists such as REM, the Jesus and Mary Chain, Primal Scream, Henry Rollins, and Queens of the Stone Age have all gone on record praising the Elevators as a rich and deep influence on their music. The band's original members, minus Tommy Hall and minus Sutherland, who was killed in a domestic dispute in 1978, briefly reunited in 1984. The band with Hall reunited again and for the final time in 2015 to headline Austin's Psych Fest, a showcase for psychedelic rock bands. In 2005, after finally finding the right cocktail of medication to treat his schizophrenia, Rocky Erickson became a touring musician again, playing a mix of 13th floor Elevators classics and material from his scattered solo albums throughout the years. He continued doing this until his unfortunate death in the spring of 2019. To this day, the cause of his death is unknown. But let's not end on a sour note. Rocky Erickson and Stacey Sutherland will always live as long as the 13th floor Elevators music is out there, and their music will always be out there as long as there are rock bands playing gonzo, weirdo, outsider, acid-fried, drug-fueled rock and roll, no matter how off the mainstream map they are.
But that was a good run through of the 13th floor Elevators. That's the kind of depth that only your Curmudgeons can at least try to give you, and what we strive for. Speaking of which,
Oh, but by the way, Chris, can I say something? We
yes, you
talked
may.
about we talked about Michael Jackson being this musical genius who creeped everybody out, right?
Hmm.
Well, now we're going to talk about the French version.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes. Thank you. That is a setup. So, uh, th- obviously, as you could tell, this is the theme of this is really weird, crazy, creepy guys in the late '60s that made indelibly beautiful underground rock and roll that continues to have very much a cult around it. And so, this
Not
guy.
not 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 underground in France.
Certainly not underground in France, but but he's underground in America. But France, he was about as pop star. Uh, Fair to say he was about as big as Sinatra there for a while, right? In
Yeah. Oh
France,
yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Before we get into and the gentleman that we're talking about is Serge Gainsbourg,
correct.
and his 19. And Chris will really delve into his 1968 album Initials BB, BB standing for Brigitte Bardot. There's more on that coming.
Yeah,
Yeah, Serge Gainsbourg. Before Chris takes up the story of the album, let me say that there is a wonderful book by a British music journalist called Jeremy Allen. Last year, as in 2021, he published a book called what's it called again? Relax, Baby, Be Cool. It's the biography of Serge Gainsbourg, and it goes through his entire career, his entire life, and it's a highly recommended book. One of my favorite music books or music biographies of last year. Check it out. It was the inspiration for Chris's choice for this episode of The Vault.
yeah, absolutely. Now, Serge Gainsbourg has always been kind of a fascinating character because he was so talented, but so fucked up, or at least he became really messed up. And so let's get into Serge a little bit and initials BB. So, Lucien Ginsburg was a Russian Jewish immigrant coming of age in Paris in the early 1940s. Yep, that tended to leave a mark,
Yeah.
specifically a yellow star for Ginsburg and
Yep.
his family, who had emigrated from what is now the Ukraine shortly after Serge's birth. Now, as an adult, Lucien Ginsburg morphed into the sophisticated, exotic, and more than occasionally deliberately strange musical icon Serge Gainsbourg. Serge has become a figure of cult oddity fascination in rock geek annals over time, but there was a period in the 1950s and 1960s where Gainsbourg was as happening as it got in France and the rest of Europe. Like I said, he might as well have been a figure on the level of a Frank Sinatra back
And by
then.
the way, in the 1980s, he had a massive popular comeback as well.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, he did. He did. But at that point, it was kind of like Brian is back with the Beach Boys. It was kind of this
Yeah.
more kind of
Yeah.
unleashed. Godzilla comes back after 30
Right.
years in captivity.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Gainsbourg, he wrote hits. He dated Brigitte Bardot, and then eventually dated for a long time Jane Birkin. So he was a guy who got all the hot actresses and was out there. He
Wrote
was
for them. He wrote for them. Yeah.
wrote for them, like Brigitte
Yeah.
Bardot. Uh, any kind of pop starlet momentum she had was all because of Serge. So he was a swinging cat who caught on to the campy but cool garage stylings of the late 1960s. On the heels of all of that, he became a bona fide rock star. Yet the darkness of Lucien Ginsburg's childhood never left Serge
Yeah.
Gainsbourg, the adult creation. There's a darkness and a subversiveness that permeates Gainsbourg's work, even when he's at his poppiest and most smile-inducing. The best example of this came in 1968, recorded in London during arguably the most exciting artistic period in that city's history. The album Initials BB is a masterpiece-level tour through a mischievous and turbulent mind. First, let's state the obvious. This is one hell of an accessible pop fun record, or fun pop record.
Yeah.
There you go. It's so weird we can't say it right. A fun pop record. The hooks are all tight and they're all exquisite. The organ and percussion flourishes are just, incredibly just fun, and they just make you laugh and smile. And it's a good mood kind of record. It's a good party record, it's essentially. And then you get all those, I guess you can call them choruses recited by women that are consistently hilarious. Listen to this album once, and for at least an hour, you won't be able to get that shabam, pow, bop, whiz,
onomatopoeia.
refrain from comic strip out of your head. It's the same thing with all those cheekily delivered lines from Brigitte Bardot on Bonnie and Clyde. Hell of a coincidence that was the year that Bonnie and Clyde became such a big hit in America, the movie. 67 or 68, around there.
It came out late 67, but by 68, it was a smash.
Yeah, it had become a phenomenon. Now, through all of that, Gainsbourg found a way to slip darkness even into that record's mix.
Yeah.
You get the song Dr. Jekyll et Monsieur Hyde, which is a pretty obviously self-referential song, even as it bops along like a theme song from one of those silly Michael Caine spy movies, or the theme song of the Newlywed Game, etc. Lyric, my name is Hyde, Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll seen in his life. This is the English translation, how it reads. Only little bitches who made fun of him. Mr. Hyde in his heart took notes from the doctor, for the doctor. No, there's any more Dr. Jekyll. I suspect that's supposed to be no, there's no more Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then you get the album closer, Chatterton, which makes things very plainly blunt. It has perhaps the album's best guitar riff on it. Now, together with its accompanying horns, you may think that Steve Cropper and Otis Redding wrote this damn thing.
Yeah.
But wait, is he really giving us a summation on famous people who killed themselves or went notes, and then telling us, regarding me, I have not been well lately? This is how it translates.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, I'm wondering, should I really be laughing or singing, or, as Arturo can attest to, dancing around like a fool to this stuff? Turns out that Serge predicted his future pretty well in that song. As the 1960s faded into the 1970s, and the 1970s set up the depraved 1980s, Serge Gainsbourg segued from ironic campiness to blatant subversiveness, drunkenness, and creepiness.
Yeah.
Now, he did let that Holocaust survivalism out into the open on an absolutely remarkable album from 1975 called Rock Around a Bunker. Might actually deserve its own vault segment.
Yeah.
But this album is simultaneously uproarious, satirical, and devastating. Here's a hint. Serge loves Chuck Berry and Fats Domino, but hates the Germans. I mean, the boogie woogiest song on this thing is called Yellow Star. Geesh. So, yeah, essentially that's what it is. It's an old-timey rock and roll song about surviving the Holocaust and about fuck the Germans.
Yeah.
It's dark, but it is amazing. Wonderfully, the guy was a craftsman, but yeah, he was dark, twisted, and perhaps
he was a classically trained musician.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was
his piano playing was classical. That was his background, classical music and jazz.
That's how he got started. I mean, he came up in the jazz clubs of France in the 1950s, and then eventually segued into this pop formula that made him such a huge star. Now, like I said, so he brings out some of that personal darkness out into the light. Now, however, what should have been obvious and understandable tragicomedy was very, very, very overshadowed by Gainsbourg's accelerating wave of embarrassing and shocking public behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And now I will let Arturo take some of this here later once I get through my setup. This included lusting over Whitney Houston on a talk show in 1986. Go find the YouTube clip. Very funny, and I'll have Arturo explain that in detail in a little bit. And at times, he was even lusting publicly over his own daughter, Charlotte, who is a French hip musical icon in her own right. Now, maybe that latter bit was a put on. But given how disgusting Serge became otherwise, it was hard to tell.
Yeah.
Very much an alcoholic.
Yeah.
smoked 5 packs a day.
Yep.
Was really he was whacked out of his mind. He was pretty much a dysfunctional alcoholic, and he basically was like that. Not even an uncle, like your great uncle that you just dread coming over because you know he's going to like fall face down in the turkey on Thanksgiving.
Exactly what he was. Yeah.
And he's probably going to try to fuck his niece. And, forget that. So anyway, Serge Gainsbourg, eventually he died of a heart attack just before he turned 63 in 1991. That this severely alcoholic, chain-smoking, dirty old man of a curmudgeon, he is a spiritual cousin of the Curmudgeons, made it to that age is something of a miracle. But then so too are Initials BB and the albums that came immediately before and after it. Enjoy the hell out of Initials BB. I mean, it really is a fun-ass record. 33 minutes, just really fun, funny, great hooks, and some like legitimately amazing pop songs. However, I also encourage all of you listening to consider it with the seriousness and sobriety with which we presume you probably also consider Nirvana's In Utero. Serge Gainsbourg is one of rock and roll's greatest sad clowns. Check him out. So on that note, we now leave the vault, and we have come to the end of our 26th voyage. I'm really excited. Our first episode of 2022. This is year 2. We plotted to rule the world in 2021. We will rule the world in 2022. Help us get there. Join our Facebook community, the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Curmudgeonly community on Facebook. You can hit us up with complaints or fan mail. We would hope fan mail at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And we're also on all the places where you find all the podcasts. Do a search for Curmudgeon Rock Report on Google, and you'll find all those places. And to clear it up for many friends and other people out there, CUR, M as in Mary, UDGEON. We love the name. That's how you spell it. Well, folks, as we close out, we just want to say we're thinking of all of you and hoping that you're staying safe during this Omicron phase of the COVID pandemic, which gives us another good excuse to come out and say it. Fuck Eric Clapton. If it wasn't for Stevie Winwood, Jack Bruce, or Dwayne Allman, we likely wouldn't have to put up with that toxic piece of shit. So with that, let us just shut him out of this podcast for good and move on to better and much more worthy people. The Curmudgeons will welcome you back here in 2 weeks. Be well, y'all.